Hi, my name is Judith, and let's talk about pintucks. Pintucks are a fold that you put in your fabric or a pleat that you stitch for a decorative way or a practical way. So you can use it like this on a shirt, you can use it on a dress, and it makes for a really nice look. But you can also use it to widen a garment or lengthen a garment, let's say for children or maybe for pregnancy. If you want to put more space in your garment, you just undo your pintucks and then you have more fabric to work with. So to do pintucks, you will use a woven fabric that is lightweight, preferably, because it's easier to work with. You will need a ruler, some marking tools. You can have a chalk like this, and my favorite is a chalk with a push pencil that is super precise. And to cut your fabric, you will need either a rotary cutter or a pair of scissors. You will also need a seam ripper, and this little tool that I love is a measuring gauge, and I'll use it on the sewing machine later on. For needles, I recommend using a Microtech size 10 or 8. And if you want to do your pintucks with double needles, you will need double needles for your machine. You also have specialty feet for your sewing machine to do pintucks. So when you do pintucks, you have to do a little math. You have to choose the width of your pintucks and the spacing of your pintucks. So before you start, look at how many pintucks you want and how to do the little math. So here is an example. If I want 1/8 width pintucks and the same width gap between. So this example is to do like really close together narrow pintucks like this. So you have to see that you're going to have your fold and your sewing is going to be on either side. So it's going to be 1/4 because you have 1/8 and another 1/8, and the spacing in between is also going to be 1/4. So if I show you the same thing with 1/4 pintuck and 1/4 gap, you have 1/2 an inch and 1/2 an inch. So when you fold on the fold line here, and then you would sew at your sewing line here. When you press it, you would have 1/4 of spacing from your fold line to your next stitch line right here. So these are pretty easy because it's 1/4 and 1/8, 1/8. But when you get with other sizes, let me show you this one. So this one, you want 1/8 pintuck, but with 1/4 inch gap. Now you really have to figure out, like, you want 1/8, so it's 1/8, 1/8 is 1/4, but then when you fold it, if you want to have your 1/4 gap, here you have to have 3/8 between your stitch lines. So it's just a little figuring out the pattern that you want, and I would really recommend to do a little pattern like this and to fold it to see if your pattern is working for your pintucks. That's what I did for most of our samples. It's really easier to understand what you're going to do. When you do your pintucks, it's easy on a piece of paper. You say 1/4, 1/8, and it works fine. But you do have to take into consideration that you are human and you trace. There's the width of the tracing line that you're going to use. there's the width of the turn of cloth, there's human error when you're sewing, it's not like super straight, so there's always going to be little differences, so don't go crazy, it's okay. And try to do like 3 pin tucks at a time and then press them, evaluate, and always as you go, reevaluate and redraw your lines and everything. Like, don't do everything in one step. Just a little tip from me. So before you start, you want to decide what the pattern of your pin tucks will be. So you can have just normal pin tucks like this, but you can play with the width of your pin tucks and the spacing. So for my example, I made an illustration in Illustrator to see different types of spacing I could use. So I did quarter pin tucks here and 1/8 here, and I decided that this one would be the nicest for me. So I did my yoke like this, and I will show you. So here's an example of pin tucks with different width to do a pattern that I made to show you. So here you can see that I did like 3 of them close together with 1/8 gap. Then I did 3/8 of a gap, then another 3, and so on. And then I did 1/4 inch, and I did little pin tucks again, and then another 1/4 inch. So you can do different patterns like that, and you can have repeats. So have fun. Play with the patterns, play with the width of your pin tucks, and see what you come up with. When you do pin tucks, since you don't know exactly the length of fabric you need, you use a big piece of fabric, and then you do your repeat patterns and you do your pin tucks, and after you put your pattern piece and you can cut around it. So this was my back yoke. I have my yoke pattern piece here. So I can put my pattern on my fabric like this. I can either draw around it or just use my rotary cutter and cut around it. So I would repeat the same thing on the other side, and then I end up with my yoke. That way I know that I have enough fabric and I won't end up with a little piece missing, which would be really sad. So first of all, you want to trace on your fabric. There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can do thread tracing with the sewing machine, where you would just sew lines with the good measurements, and then you would fold where your stitch line is. Or you can do thread tracing by hand, like I did here. So here you can see that I just stitch by hand the lines where I want my fabric to fold, or you can just draw your lines on your fabric. So let me show you with this piece. So you would line, let's say I want to start here, then I can either try to use a marking tool that is the most sharp possible, the most precise possible, so something like this, and go really close to your ruler, and you mark your fabric following the straight grain of your fabric. So let's say I make one here, and then I would measure for, I'm in centimeters, let me go in inches. Let's say I want to do like 1/2 inch. So then I would do 1/2 inch. I'll use another marking tool to show you. So the little pencil like this. This one doesn't show as much, but you have this one, or you can use your chalkener. So you make your lines, and like I was telling you before, I would do 3 at a time. That way it's easier. If you're a little off, you're not repeating that mistake, then you end up with like your pin tucks going like this. So you can always put your lines back where you want them. And then we can go on the sewing machine and just fold our fabric and sew following our lines. So here I folded my fabric following the line that I made earlier. And the best way to do your pintucks is to use either the markings on your foot or the markings here that you have on your plate. If you want to be ultra precise with your measurements, you can use your little measuring gauge, and if you want to do like a quarter or a 3/8, you can just place it like this, put your foot down, and just see exactly where your needle ends up with your measuring gauge. Here I'm just going to follow the marking on the sewing machine. So you place your fabric, and then slowly you're going to sew all the way down at You don't have to go to tack at the end, go back and forth, because you're going to put your pattern piece on. But you can do one like this and do the same thing for the others. And start sewing. Here is the result of our pintucks that I did on the sewing machine. So I folded at the trace line that I made, and I stitch 1/8. And when you press your pintucks, of course you want to press them all towards the same side. And I would recommend not to pull too much when you're pressing, because it does distort them, especially when they're small like this. It shows a lot. So you just want to like fold them on themselves like this. And here I have my little pintucks, so I didn't put any gap between them, so it's like a different style, and that's the result. So I showed you the traditional way of doing pintucks. You can do it, of course, with the machine. You could do everything by hand, which is a labor of love. And you can also do it with specialty feet for pintucks, or you can use a double needle. When you use a double needle, instead of having really like a fold and a regular pintuck, it does more of a bump, or a little like when you do cording. So you have a bump like this. If you want really a pintuck like we did, you have to put the tension on your machine to the highest. That way it will really grab the fabric and fold it together, and after you just have to press it. So that's the way you can do it with the double needle. The only bad thing about that is that you can't play with the width of your pintucks, because you have the width of the double needle that tells you the width of your pintuck. So here you can see examples of different ones I did with the double needles. So some of them, as you can see, are only like bumps, but when you press them, they kind of look like pintucks. So you can see here that it's not a total fold, but it gives the illusion of a pintuck when it is pressed. So after doing all these steps, you're ready to just put your pattern piece on your fabric and cut your pattern piece and use it as a regular piece of pattern in your garment. And like here in the front, I put pintucks on the front bodice, and in the back you have pintucks on the yoke. So it adds a really nice detail. You can even do it on the sleeve. You can do it horizontally, vertically. Sky's the limit. So have fun with your pintucks, and à la prochaine!